Okay then, yeah, I'll do that. Thanks, Nate. Bye. Welcome back, everyone. Nee's handed over running of the session to me. So since none of you are impacted by the fire alarm, we'll get underway. So I'll just share my screen. Right, so I'm going to cover a few things today. So there's a list of the main ones, but once we get through that, hopefully we'll have time to go and have a look at the latest version of the business information system that Fuzzuki and I have been working on, and there's a couple of new functions that I'm starting to use that I'd like to show you. So what I'm trying to convey here is my thinking in terms of solving some of the problems that you and I face in our daily work. So it's not so much about some really neat, fancy functions. It's more about the thought processes that go behind starting with something and you're faced with having to come up with something else based on that data. So, and this is a real example. I have de-identified the data, hence things like that. But I started with a draft budget that was basically column A and B, and the client came back and said, look, I want to put something to the board based on our strategic business plan around what he called pillars 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now they had slightly different names in terms of what they actually represented, but that'll do for today. So given that this was going to be a work in progress, manually allocating these items to each of them and sending it out and then coming back and saying, oh, look, we've decided to change it to do this, that, and the other thing, would involve a lot of manual work each time, particularly when the presentation was going to be just around revenue, direct costs, the TEC or the total employment cost, overheads, and then what the bottom line looked like. So the first thing I did was add in a column that classified each of these items into those groups. So not a particularly onerous task. And so that enables me to then come over here and create some formulas. And I'm using the sum product formula here, which will then pull in whatever values that we put here. So for instance, I can put that into that. As you can see, this XYZ activity is fairly profitable. And these are real figures, by the way, so yeah. And okay, so now there is one area missing, and that's the administration, but we won't worry about that for the time being. So I'll just use pillar 5, just so you can see that as I'm putting those figures in, they're coming through here, populating this presentation. So it's a fairly simple technique, but you can use it in a variety of situations. Now, the other column that I added was this one, and this is a fairly important column because it enables me to see that, okay, we started with the draft annual budget over here. I've allocated all of XYZ income, that's fine, but I haven't allocated all of these other ones. And so, for instance, if I just did a partial allocation, you're still seeing that it's not going to reconcile. And if I go the other way and put more in, we just get a flag to say, okay, there's a difference between our starting point at the organisational level and how we've spread this out across the different pillars. So as I said, fairly simple technique, but it does save a lot of work, because if the client comes back and says, oh, look, I actually don't think that this is a direct cost, it's really an overhead, I change it here and it's rippled through automatically into the correct figures over here without having to do too much work. So it's a nice, easy, simple technique, but it's one that I've found to be fairly useful in quite a variety of situations. Now, before we go on, I'll come down to point 6. So let me just unmute Liz for a minute, if I can. Fizuki, are you online at the moment? Okay, I'm going to assume that you can actually see this, but I will blow it up a little bit more. So the question is, why did I make a copy of this particular sheet to use in the presentation? So that's something for you to just think about. I would have liked to have had a bit of a poll or a chat with a couple of you, but we'll come back to that. So it's not a trivial question. So the next one is about some quick ways to de-identify data and just doing a few queries. So again, and this is live data. I've already de-identified it over here, and I used an array formula for that based on what I put here. Now, there is only 800 odd, I think, and that's, we're only 628, 627 rows of live data. So it's a pain to copy that down. So one of the shorthand ways of doing this in Google Sheets is you can use the right-hand handle to fill down. So if I double-click that, you'll see that that data is automatically populated all the way down, which can save a lot of time when you're dealing with some big tables. So it's a neat little trick with Google Sheets. Now, over here, I've taken a copy of the transaction data, and I really do like to do this as part of my processes of working through this. By taking a copy, I have the original transaction data intact, haven't touched it. I can do what I like over here, and if I stuff something up, I can throw it away and go back and get another lot of the transaction data. And in copying the data, I'll copy everything as a value. So there are now no formulas here. It is just the straight value. And again, that does mean that you don't get tripped up if you decide to delete a block of data for some reason because it's not relevant anymore or whatever, you're not going to muck up the rest of the data because you've accidentally deleted a key formula that impacts further down. So I have a filter on the payment method. So at the moment, I'm only selecting the two annual ways, Easy Pay and Invoice. And before I started, I did check that we've got, that was the sum total for the membership fees, and that's the sum total for the annual WR gain. And you can see the sum product formula not affected by the filter, the sum formula not affected by the filter, the subtotal formula is, and so you can see that it's only totaling those rows that have a value relating to the filter selection criteria. And you can see that also in the WR side of that. This is important when you are dealing with filtered data or hidden data, that you don't necessarily want to total up everything, including what's not included in the filter. So the subtotal function is very important in that context. I tend to use the subtotal function more often than not when I'm analysing data for that very reason, because I often want to filter out particular items to help me narrow down what I'm actually looking for. Now, over the last couple of months, I've become acquainted with the query function. So I'm not going to go through it in any great detail, particularly where this one's a slightly more advanced version of the query function, because it's adding a total row, and that's what the total represents. So that's this total row down here. But the query, I found the query function, first off, a warning, it is hard to learn. I'm still learning. I regard myself as a novice on this particular function. But it is very, very worthwhile. And when we get to the new version of the biz, I'll give you a better example of why that is the case. So one of the references that I've provided in the notes, Ben Collins, refers to the query function as a pivot table in a function, and it really is. But this particular query function, it's saying, have a look at all of the data from column A to I, but I only want to select column C, and I want to select the sum of column H. I only want to do it where column A is not null. So I've got a whole series of rows below column A that are null. And one of them actually has some totals for column H and I, which I don't want in my analysis. So that's a nice, easy way of making sure that they're not picked up. And then I want to group them by column C, which is this business contract, corporate. And then I want to put a label on the sum as the annual membership gain. And as I said, I've also added in the total row. Now, these curly brackets turn this into, if I remember the terminology correctly, an array type function, which enables me to do that. As I said, this is a slightly more advanced version of even what I've been working with. There's plenty of examples on the internet. Ben Collins has some good free online training around this. So that's the query function, and this is what it produces. So it produces this little table here. As you can see, it's a nice, easy way of summarizing the data. One of the big advantages about it, of course, is we're dealing with columns. So we don't have to worry about whether there's 500 rows, 5,000 rows, or it's data that is growing over time. So it might be something like a list of transactions from the accounting system, and so you start the financial year and you get your first month, and then you add the next time you do a download, you've got 2 months, and so on. You don't have to worry about what's the last row, because this will look after it automatically for you. So it is very, very useful in that context. And then this is just another query function, and it's just selecting where column I, which is this annual WR gain, is greater than a particular value, so greater than 0. The sequencing and how you write the formulas is tricky in this, and so to be able to reference an external cell, you've got to resort to this sort of way of writing the formula. So put it in quotes with the ampersand bracketing the cell that you're interested in. So that's the query function, and that's just doing the sum of this particular thing to say that yes, it does actually work. Now the other function that I find useful for analysing the data is the filter function. Much easier function to learn how to use. So here, what I've done is I've selected all of the records where the left most characters is equal to a 2. So I've taken the right of so start from the inside. The left of A2 to A, so that's A20. So I've taken A2 will be the result for this line here. So left of A2 and 2, so I'm starting from the left and I go 1, 2, A2, and then I take the right one character of that, which is the 2, and I've said I only want those that are the 2, and it's filtering everything from column A through to column I, starting at row 2. So again, it's fairly nice in that it will pick up growing lists of data. So it's flexible like that. And as you can see, I've just pulled out just those that commence with the 2. So it's particularly useful, this sort of approach, when you just can't use straight filter function. You know, if I tried to just use the filter command over here on this and put in a filter, there we go. You can see I can manually select all of the ones with 2s, but if I've got a lot of data which I have here, that's not a particularly smart way of doing it. So the filter function from up here has its use. It's good when you just want to get a quick overview of perhaps how many groups of a particular categories of particular data that you're dealing with. So I could say, okay, I've got all of these. I'm really only interested in the life members or the micro business or whatever, and then it helps you craft a more sophisticated approach to pulling out the data you want. But where you're trying to select something, as I am here, which is effectively the second character. Now, it could be any character, or it could be a whole series of characters. So, I might want to select every record that has not-for-profit in it, or NFP, or something like that. And this allows you to do that. And column, then all I would have, I make that H, as you can see, but that's not a big deal. And if I undo that so that it's back to I instead of H, there it is, and it's a fairly efficient function as well. So we've done that. So here are the references, and I'm happy to give this to Nee so she can send it out to all of you. So you've got this. Ben Collins, great source for Google Sheets. And then Coding for Losers, it has some interesting material there. Some of what I've used I got from that. It's a slightly different approach, but well worthwhile having a look at. And as I said before, I take a copy of the data, work on the copy, and I copy and paste the values so that I'm not caught up with functions I'm not aware of or aware what they're fully doing, distorting my data analysis. And would have question about this, but I'm unable to do that. So why did I make a copy of this to use in the presentation? And it's all about privacy. So one of the nice things with Google Sheets is I can have a look at the version history. So you can see that I've made some changes today. So that's now the current version. Up until I opened it up, made those changes, this was the current version. So in data, you can't go back and have a look at what the original values were because I've taken a copy of it. If I'd just taken a copy and then de-identified the data and used that, you would be able to go back to that version and see what the de-identified data was originally. So it's very important when you're working with corporate data that identifies individuals or other entities. If you've got to circulate that more widely, even sometimes within the organisation, you may have to take steps to de-identify the data and then make sure that the version you circulate doesn't betray what you've just de-identified. So that's the reason for that. Now, I think the biz will probably be a little bit more interesting than this. So we'll go to the copy of the biz. Hopefully that doesn't get in my way too much. So we'll start here. Well, actually, we will start here to show you what my new approach to grabbing the accounting data is, or not so much grabbing that, but working with it. So we have the query function. Let me expand that. So there's query function. It's slightly more straightforward. I'm not trying to put total rows and that sort of thing in, although that could be useful, but we'll come to that in a minute. This uses the pivot function, which allows me to basically get this format. Without the transpose function this data comes out with this row as the column, and all of this accounts as the the columns, and this is and the year week is the row. Doesn't really matter in terms of extracting the data, except that for some organisations they will have several hundred accounts, and scrolling across looking at the accounts if you're trying to find something is a little bit problematic. Whereas the year week, you're probably only dealing with generally up to 2 years of data. So it's only talking about 104, 105 rows going across, rather than 2 or 3 or 4 or 500. And in the biz design, that's important, because if there's a new account, it's a lot easier to go to the last month or the last couple of weeks and have a look and go, okay, where's the amount that I'm missing? So this particular function replaces the transactions pivot. As you can see, it looks much the same, except the pivot table puts in the grand total. If I ticked on the option, I could have put a total for each of the columns, but I don't need that at the moment. But there is one problem with a pivot table, and that is when I'm looking at this, even using the Google trick of selecting a range and not worrying about the last cell. So this is saying select everything from A5 through to M, whatever the last cell in the sheet is. And if the sheet grows in outside of this pivot function, the range will expand with it. Problem with the pivot table is it does it as a one-off. And so you can see I'm back to M99. But I've only got 4 or 5 weeks of data here. I'm going to have 52 or 53 columns of data by the end of the year. I don't want to have to come in every time and check that I've picked up all of the data. So that's the drawback with the pivot table approach. And if we just have a look at the account transactions. So this is what the data looks like. So this is the data that we extract from Xero. So it's just a transaction download report. I select particular accounts that that I'm interested in. I then use some functions, and I use I make them array formula functions because I've only got to put it in one cell and it will populate all the way down. And so again, I've found it very useful to become familiar with the array formula. It's not hard to learn, and you can't put everything inside an array formula. So from memory index match, you can't. You've got to then go to either a VLOOKUP or a HLOOKUP if you want to do that. But a lot of the other functions you can put inside an array formula, and just putting something like the if just limits how much it's going to go. So if I didn't have that, the blank cells would get evaluated as well. So you can see that there are no formulas down there for those values. It just automatically populates it. Same with the year week. There's formulas here, but there aren't, because this particular organisation doesn't have programs and events. There's nothing there. And this was when I was working up my approach to grabbing the data. So you can see without the transpose function, I've got the weeks coming here and all of the accounts as the column headings. So the query function, so it's enabled a more flexible approach to the biz. So here I'm just pulling out the data by month. So I've just selected the sum B, which is the net, and using the month value instead of the week. So N is the year month, and so it will then group them all by the relevant month. Now, I could limit, I could include more data, but that's all I want for this. Now, one of the advantages of this is if Xero changes the way it produces the transaction download, it's a very easy process to come in and amend this particular function to say, okay, it's not column N anymore, it's going to be column P, and it's not going to be sum B, it's going to be sum D, and that's all you've got to do. You don't have to muck around with anything else. Whereas if you're using the pivot table, you would have to redefine each of the fields that you're working with in the pivot table. So that's enabled a much more flexible approach to pulling out the data. So now let me come over here. So this is the main end result of grabbing the transaction data. So we can have a look at, in this case, either the monthly actuals or the forecast, depending on where we are during the year. So we're currently in September, or we finished September rather. So these three columns will be the actuals, And this data going forward will be the forecast. And so that's on a month by month basis. We can then have a look at the year-to-date actuals, the year-to-date budget, the forecast, the variance, the full year forecast and budget, and the variance to that. This is the current month, and you can see there's a little flag here to say, well, the current month data here is not going to be the current month data over here because it's for the current month. So because it's different, because we're looking at September. So if I made that maybe that's not the current month. So another little design technique is, there we go, the current month is 31st of July. I only set that once, and that drives a number of the other sheets. So let's come over here and go 31/7. All right, so we're now in sync. So this is a technique where you can give some added flexibility, but you can also make sure that people are aware that this data is not going to be the same as the data that's being used over here, because it's a different period. So again, if I was to go back to the dashboard, not that one, and made that 30 September, we come over here, it's still working away. So we're now looking at a different month. So it's a nice flag. And particularly if you're looking at something only once or twice a month, and or if other people are also looking at it independently of you, that's a visual cue to say, just make sure that that's the right date that you want if you're going to use the data here. So again, it's just a design technique in terms of where you're providing some flexibility, and you might get some potential inconsistencies with other data on that page. You want a method of flagging that, and that's just a formula that compares the value in X3 with what the current month value is, and conditional formatting. So if we come down here to conditional formatting, you can see, if that cell's not empty, then it uses that particular color. And so you can see from the formula that if it is the same, it just puts a null value in there. That's the double quotes, hence the empty cell. So it's fairly easy formula. Conditional formatting is reasonably straightforward. The reason that there's two conditional formattings for that cell is I wanted a particular color for the default. So if it is empty, then the fill color is the same as the surrounding cells, and it just blends into the background. So again, we just make that 30 September, and the visual flags disappeared. So that's one little technique. The other one is, some of you may have, and I'll just blow this up quickly so you can all see it. I've got this little stray thing called remaining forecast. I'll go back to where I can actually work with this. And why I've got that is I want to use that, so that's S3, in this formula. There we are. So I'm looking into another sheet, and the column heading for that other sheet is remaining forecast, hence the matching on that name into the monthly forecast in that range. Now what that does, it means, because I started off by having the same column names here as I had in the other sheet, and then I thought about it and thought, well, actually I might want to change these to be more non-accountant user friendly, because we're talking to the client with all of this, and so they might not fully understand what FY forecast is or FY budget. And I'll show you some other things I've done with these in a second. And so I broke the link between these names and the names in the other sheets, which are really just working sheets. You might occasionally go to them with the client, but probably 95% of the time you're not, because all the data's here and it's much easier to look at in one sheet. So again, if I had more columns, then I'd just put the names up here. And these things are called what we call helper cells. And it just means that I'm evaluating these particular functions once, but using the results down here. So for an index match formula, it's not a huge saving in processing time performance for the sheet. You might remember the little update bar sometimes was a bit slow. But if you're dealing with some product, it makes a huge difference, because with some product, it's doing every calculation in every cell of the range every time it's referencing. So if I've got, not sure, I tried to get rid of all of the sum product formulas because of that, but here's one. So to evaluate this, the sum product formula actually evaluates every cell in the range C10 to N194. Now, I have transaction data from one client for the financial year that's 2,500 rows. So that's a lot of calculations. And if I've got to calculate B13 every time for every cell, that's an added overhead. And the same with C8 to N8. So it's much better to just do it once, and then it can just reference that, pull it in, doesn't have to do the calculation for every single cell. So that's why I have these helper cells. So these were used for the monthly data. After that, I didn't need too many, except for the column names, and I needed to replicate that for this formula here. So that's just some little tips. Now, monthly forecast report version 2. So the first thing you'll notice is I got rid of all of the months. Client decided they didn't need that, and that's fine. But I've moved the months up to the front, so we can still have a look at the current month actuals and the budget. I've still got that cell there. And I've just left a note there to remind people that if they do want to look at a different month, then just put the value in here. So the formula here, again, it's not terribly complex. It's reasonably easy to learn. You've just got to remember how it works. And it's the text function. So this takes, in this case, the date and displays it in month format, which is the full month name. So if I was to delete one of the M's, then I get the abbreviated version of it. So if you just want the 3-letter abbreviation, that's all you do. If you want the full one, I'll just put it back, then that's all it is. And there are some other variations on that. So if I was to put space year in that, so I get September 20. If I want the full year, then it's just a matter of adding in the extra Y's. So the 4 Y's or 4 M's give you the full value. The 3 or the 2 give you the abbreviated version. So it makes the headings much more informative, because you can actually say, well, I know I've got as at September over here, and again, that's using the text function with the abbreviated approach. And you can see you can put text at the start of the text function. It doesn't have to be part of it. It's just use the ampersand to concatenate, and you can put other text after it if you need to. That's a fairly good technique for putting together meaningful column headings. And there's not a lot of change in the formulas here, except that I have, well, actually, there's one little technique. So with index match, particularly when you're dealing with, and I could have made that just P instead of P192, but there are a lot of empty rows in this. For the ones that are empty and you don't find a match, it will generate an error. So if there's no data for that particular row, you will get an error message. But you know that's not really an error. It's just for that month, there's no data. That there were no transactions for that month. So that's why the if error is there. However, I know that there could be some other problems, and so rather than going, okay, if there's an error, just make it 0, I've put in a meaningful error message. And so for this particular one, because I'm looking at the original monthly budget, I'm saying potentially there's a missing account in the original monthly budget. So that gives me some error checking that I have all the accounts that I need. Now, this will pop up as an error when there's a new account added to the chart of accounts after you've set the budget. Obviously, when you did the budget, that account wasn't there, so you expect that to pop up, and it's a fairly easy fix. So that's again, the whole idea of building useful, robust spreadsheets is to make sure that you have enough error checking and reconciliation in that you can rely on your automated approach to flag something when it's not quite right. And so again, it's also looking at that. So that's probably the biggest change there. As I said, just decoupling some of the data from up here, the headings. Now, the other thing I wanted to look at is this particular tab over here. And we set this up to make sure that we would pick up fairly easily if there were any discrepancies. So with the transaction data, I'm pulling in all the transaction data. So it's got the revenue, the expenses, the asset, liability, equity transactions, if they're there. And so here's an example of the filter function where I'm actually pulling in a single value rather than a set of the data. And I've just found that I need to put the round function to 2 decimal places in because I've had mismatches, and I've expanded the number of decimals out to about 6, and it's still 0, but it's telling me there's a mismatch. I'm looking at it going, it's still 0. It's not a mismatch. And so if I put round 2 in, it just eliminates that slight discrepancy in the way that the Google Sheet is representing the data at the bit level in the data. So if you've done any computing, you'll understand that there's different ways of representing data. We're looking at what's basically ASCII, what they call ASCII data. So the your normal A to Z, 0 to 9 special characters type stuff. But a lot of this will be in bytes of 8 bits, and the 8 bits represents one ASCII character. And so if one of those insignificant bits in the byte is not set properly, it will show up even though the ASCII representation will still be 0. So that's why the round's there. It's useful to be aware of that, and that fixes the issue. And then what I'm doing is I'm filtering those transactions in column B. So I've only got one column, but only where column F is equal to H2. So H2 being revenue. So one of the columns in the transaction data is the account type, whether it's a revenue, expense, etc. And then I'm just summing that to give me a single value. So it's a nice little technique. And so I get the sums of that. I've just put in a simple sum here. And then I said here, if F3, transactions by the week is not equal to I1, that's the total over here, then we have a problem. So F3 that's all of the transactions that I've pulled out of the transaction data. And remember, this is now my pivot table. So I want to make sure that nothing's gone wrong with my formula. And now that I'm using the query function, it's unlikely unless the columns have changed. So, if column B is no longer the net value, it's actually column C, then this will show up as an error. Hopefully I would have picked that up when I've brought the data in, but just in case I haven't. So that's what this is doing. It's just making sure that the sum of the transaction data is actually equal to the data I've extracted from that transaction listing. And so here we've got a formula that's looking at the total. So if column A is not equal to blank, then if column E, which is the difference, is equal to 0, we put a match in, and if it's not equal to 0, we don't have a match, then put that in. That's all the matches. So again, it's just an example of the array formula. And unfortunately, because of the way that this was structured and what we want to do, I can't use an array formula for it, so because each row is slightly different until you come down to the actual account level data. So here I actually want to look at the total of the revenue and the expenses, and that just pulls that value in. That gets it from the weekly actuals. So I've gone to past where I've set up my query function for the weekly actuals. So that is the weekly actuals, and made sure that's in sync. And again, this will highlight if there's a new account, or as was the case, believe it or not, when you use the ISO week num formula, there can be a week 53, and so we had to make some structural changes to the biz to make sure that where there was a week 53 and we're dealing with weekly data, we picked it up. So it is important to build in the formulas to reconcile the data that you've extracted with how you're actually processing it. The reason that I have weekly actuals and monthly actuals is that because of using the ISO week number formula, the first of a particular month may not actually, it may be grouped with the previous week, depending on when it starts. And so when you sum of those weeks based on the week number to produce your monthly totals, they won't reconcile with the zero reports. And so that's why I've gone to monthly actuals, and I'm using the transactions by month rather than, which is what we were doing before, summing all of the weeks based on the month that the week was supposedly in. So this now means that the monthly actuals will line up, or should line up, with the zero reports. So we have some clients where we do actually want to look at the data on a weekly basis to make sure that everything's on track on a weekly basis. But when it comes to board meetings and so on, they're more interested in the monthly data, and it's important that the months line up with the official zero reports. So, Nee, are you back yet?
Hello.
So, does anyone have any questions?
Hi guys. So we're asking you to perhaps you can leave your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask Gerry your question. No, Gerry, seems like we do not have any questions at the moment from the ground.
Okay then. So I can't give you a copy of the biz, but I will make the other template available to you. So that's this one and has the links there. The important messages out of both of these are just the approach to designing the sheets that you want to work with. So unless you're doing something as a one-off and you're never ever going to want to come back to it, it's worthwhile putting a little bit of thought into structuring it so that if you've got to make changes to the data, what you've done in terms of summarizing it and so on doesn't have to be redone, that it will automatically be picked up for you. So that was the so that was the why I put the classification in here, because that's probably a one-off. Once we agree on it, that's fine. If we want to move the numbers around, then they're automatically picked up here. I don't have to write formulas based on anything else. Now, I could have done it a few other ways, but that's probably the most straightforward and simple process. And the other thing was around reconciling your data, making sure that you've actually picked up all of the data, or if you do have a discrepancy, you know why you've got it. So it doesn't mean that a discrepancy is necessarily a bad thing. It may be that the way you've selected the data, you're expecting that you'll pick up these anomalies, and they may be the ones that you actually want to have a look at. Or it may be that they're not of interest to you in that particular analysis. Obviously, in this one, it's important that I go through with the CEO and we go, yeah, we're happy that the new total, whatever it is going to be the one that we want to run with for the budget, as opposed to, oh, we just had a guess at how they'd look over here and we didn't realise that we were over what we spent last year and we didn't want to do that. And through to the reconciliations that we put into the biz. And just as a final one, so just bringing these things into some sort of dashboard. So I can, without having to go to the reconciliation tab, I can look here and go, okay, yes, the transactions are matching, and if there weren't any that matched, I could look down here and see what they were. And the use of conditional formatting to highlight variances to what you'd normally expect. So forecasted cash balance, negative cash balance is not good. Trading insolvent, not good. So you want to really flag that as an issue. And again, this is just pulled a lot of the data together so that it's a quick. I can have a look and see. Oh yeah, that's the month. This is the date. I can then go to the more detailed report and have a look at it in a little bit more detail. And you can do some calculations in terms of your gross profit margin and so on. And data, you could set up a bit of balance sheet, do some balance sheet ratios such as the current rate of solvency. So with that, I'll sign off. I'll share this with you, Nee, so you can then send it to other people.
Okay.
As I said, I've de-identified the data.
I still got a one last question from
Yep.
Ping. If any data entered in the process gone wrong, how could you find out? How do you detect any errors?
Okay, so and I'm sorry I actually corrected the error in this, but there was a new account added here. I'll show you what happens. So that's not the one. Let me come over to this one. So you can see what happens. So this chart of accounts on this particular one, the version 2, doesn't relate to the chart of accounts that we set up originally because I copied this in from somewhere else. So and all I did was update the revenue side so that I could see, yes, the formulas are working. But you can see down here that I've got an account prepayments, but I've now, there's a, the full error message is missing account in monthly actuals. So that's saying that account is not in the monthly actuals. And then obviously it flows through to the other formulas. So that's telling me that for some reason I've missed putting in an account into here. So the consistency across. If, for instance, let me go to the transaction data. Account transactions. Okay, so make it a little easier on myself. I'm going to change this to sales A. So there are no sales A accounts there. So if I was to go to my reconciliations, get this out of the way, you can see I'm getting an error message here. It's saying there's a missing account. Now it's not popping up here because of where I'm getting it, but I can then look at, and this is the totals stay the same. I should have added, and I've got a count function here that says there are 2 lines that don't match. There's a funny thing with the count if function, and in some cases, instead of reporting 1, it will report 2, and it's really hard to bring it back to 1. So so that's where that is. Now, if I went over to, because the revenue is not matching, transactions by week, I can see here sales A, the $700. One of the reasons I did transpose this was I found when new accounts were added, I would normally get a dollar value as the error. I'm not sure why that's not coming up there. And so it's pretty easy to then go through and look at the last 4 weeks and go up. That's that's the value I'm looking at. If there were values in each week, it'd be a little harder to find, but you just go to the monthly one and go, okay, I'm looking for a total for the month of 700. That's it, and that's why I'm pulling up that sort of error. So that's the process. As I said, I'm not sure. Yeah, why? Yeah, because I use a filter function here to pull this list from the chart of accounts. So that's why, because normally if there's a new account, it'll be in the chart of accounts, and because it's not in the chart of accounts. So if I was to add in and it's just one above. And make that sales A. And there we go, it's working away. Even though there's not a huge amount of data, it's still, there's a lot of formulas, and just takes a little, although, and there we go, sales A doesn't match. I'm looking for $700. So I can now go into either my weekly, not that one, the week, transactions by week, and go, okay, are there any in that week for 700? As I said, if I was looking for a one where the potentially there was values every week, you'd go and have a look in the month one first. But you go, there's my $700. That's what it is. So does that answer the question?
I think so. Yeah. So that's the question from Ping.
Yeah. Okay. So and again, you can see trying to build in some robustness into the whole process, rather than copying and pasting the chart of accounts. It's dynamic. So if I update the chart of accounts, then I will get all the new accounts, and so I don't have to worry about making changes across multiple sheets. All I've got to do is keep the chart of accounts up to date. And again, this is just a straight report out of zero. And I have some formulas that I use to control what's going on. One of them being, is this particular item going to be in the cash flow forecast? So things like depreciation, no, you don't want them in the cash flow. And so there's a whole lot of entries that you won't want in the cash flow. And so that's a manual, you go through, do that once. If there's a new account, you've got to evaluate it. And then this formula is the one that I use. So if it's not in the cash flow, it's multiplied by 0 when it comes to pulling it out of for the cash flow forecast. If it is, it multiplies it by 1. So it gets included. Okay, any other questions? Okay, then, well, until next time.
The final.
Okay.
I have the link you shared.
Yes. Good. You might want to just convert that to.
Hi, Gerry.
I wouldn't convert
Hello.
it to Excel.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me? You?
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, connection wasn't good. Yeah, I think that was the last question from the audience.
Okay then.
And yeah, and we will share your training today. Yeah, to the library.
Yep.
Our training portal. So whoever couldn't attend can rewatch it later. Thanks, Gerry.
Yep. Okay then. Thanks everyone and good luck.
Thanks, everyone. Signing off
Bye.
now. Bye.